Today I'm going to talk about releasing your games in a cross-platform and multi-platform way amongst PCs and desktops, mobile devices and social networks. And well, Game Insight has started 5 years ago as a social first developer. We have developed the very first city building games out there for social networks. And throughout the last 5 years, we have managed to migrate one of the first companies out there to mobile by releasing city building hidden object games free to play on mobile. We've stayed few quarters in US top grossing as number one once Android and iOS free to play just became available once you had those in-apps out there. And throughout those years, we have managed to migrate actually back from mobile to Facebook and desktop as well. So for us, it's a full circle. We've started from desktops, expanded to mobile, and nowadays, even though all the new players and the next billion users are going to come from mobile, unless you have those platforms in the mix, you couldn't actually achieve the biggest buzz out there. You couldn't create this viral loop and viral effect, so your players could invite anyone, anywhere at all times. So it's actually a paradigm shift. Let's look at the paradigm shift in the last 5 years. Back 5 years ago on Facebook, the typical game maybe had 2 sessions per day, like a farming game or city building game. You would open this game and spend a few hours in that while sitting on the desktop. And typical session time was really, really long. So the first time we have expanded into mobile, we saw that people would use their phones in a really short, quick bursts, so maybe 3-5 minutes in a row. But the number of those sessions compared to desktop is really huge. So you take out your phone. Last year the stats was 220 times. Nowadays, the last research from December, it's up to 250 times a day. So every time you get your phone out of your pocket, you have a chance to expose your game to the player audience. So this is a radical paradigm shift in how the games were consumed before. Nowadays, smaller sessions, quick bursts, and still the huge number of time spent on mobile, like 30% of time is being spent playing. And the only things that games compete with on mobile are social networks. So during those 50 minutes, most of the sessions are being broken by incoming message, either from SMS or iMessage, WhatsApp or something like that. And you could see that in the last year, this is the number of players who have transitioned from other platforms to mobile. And you would see that everything else, like social and leisure and travel apps, are growing much faster than games. So that's why you would see many more sessions on mobile per day. And actually, gaming has grown so rapidly in the last 3 years that this year it's not the most quickest growing one, because it's already on this verge, on this peak of the prime time on mobile, and every other class of apps is growing faster than that on mobile. People are more comfortable to use travel apps and book their trips, so you have to battle with these apps for the prime time on mobile. And to do that, you have to figure out, like, if I'm doing a mobile first app, so I should also have a version on PC and on all other platforms and on desktops, because the player must be able to play this game at any moment of time on any platform. If he has 50 minutes on PC, he should be able to dedicate his time to that. So how do you migrate back from mobile to desktop? What kind of technologies could you use? And it's kind of ironic again that 3 years ago we had to abandon Adobe Flash, and there was no Adobe Air, and we had to create our own C++ technology. Nowadays we use Unity as well. But throughout the last 3 years, those technologies have caught up, and any Flash developer could develop both mobile, PC, and Facebook Flash games at the same time. But
These are kind of key points that we look at once we initiate development of new games. We have 14 game development studios and 900 people, full-time people working on those games. So we have a pretty healthy mix of technologies, and all of them are being done in a cross-platform way, so we'll have to launch for both all of these platforms. And what we're actually looking nowadays are, is this technology future-proof? So nowadays a lot of platforms create new requirements every year. So once you pick a technology, does this technology support 64-bit, let's say for iOS, which is a new requirement on Apple? You might have heard that you couldn't release non-64-bit apps for a few days now. Can you get enterprise support? Is there a great active community that updates all those plugins for new operating systems? And if you make a wrong bet, it might fail you within 6 to 10 months of time once a platform rolls out some kind of new requirements out there. And once you develop in a cross-platform way, you have to figure out whether your team is ready to build one game for all platforms at the same time, whether it's able to deliver experience for both desktop and mobile at the same time, or you have to have multiple teams doing that. And throughout our 14 teams, we have really different approaches. Sometimes you would find a team that is so skillful and agile, they could actually create a single code base and deploy to all platforms at the same time. While sometimes you would find that the team is only like tablet specific, they could only do tablet games, and you would have a second team helping them to optimize for mobile, to optimize for Facebook. And we've seen different teams using different approaches and achieving different levels of success, but this is just a thing that you should consider moving forward. Can you just have a small, agile team that will deliver the content to all mediums, or do you need to build multiple teams out there? Or you would just outsource that if it's not a free-to-play service-style game that you could just give to someone to port once and forget about that. So luckily nowadays, you don't have to know fancy words like continuous integration servers and have a lot of technical specialists setting this thing up. You would have things like Unity Cloud Platform that lets you upload your source files, and it would build it for all platforms at the same time. And there are a lot of cloud testing services out there, so once you build that, you could deploy to cloud and test it through 200 and over devices at the same time, so you don't have to buy all of that. We didn't have that luxury maybe 4 years ago. We had to buy all of those devices for all of our studios and optimize for all of that stuff. So nowadays it's much, much easier to get started in a cross-platform way. So what is the difference between cross and multi-platform? This is a question back from those console times. Once a game comes out for one console and maybe it's available for a few more, it's multi-platform. But we always had this dream as players, so we could start playing on one platform and continue playing on another one. So cross-platform means that you could start on one platform and continue playing on another one. And I guess that's a de facto standard nowadays, because once you start playing match 3 game on Facebook, you kind of expect to go to mobile and keep continuing the same levels and moving forward. So here's a player's take on that. So a player nowadays isn't ready to start playing a game unless he knows that his save is in cloud. He's able to start on one platform and go to another one and continue doing that. Because once you commit to playing to one game, and you know it's going to take maybe half a year, maybe a year of that game, if you change a device throughout that year and you lose your save game, well, players just went nuts and will keep writing to your support email asking you to recover those save games, or maybe to transfer the save game from one platform to another. So players are really sensitive about that in the last year, and they really want to know whether they can back up the save game in the cloud and keep moving on further. So luckily, Facebook 3 years ago has created a de facto standard for single sign-on and identity. With just a click, you would sign into Facebook, and even if you switch a platform, you could just keep playing, but you have to build and structure your server infrastructure for that, your server code for that. Nowadays, you would find new platforms and new competitors like Twitter, and some of the regions across the world don't have Facebook. Like in Asia, there are some countries that use alternative sign-on systems, and let's say Twitter is popular in Japan and in some MENA regions, so you might consider implementing this as well. And Google Plus solution, even though it's not available, like it's available for other platforms, but not a lot of developers use that. It's a de facto standard for Android, so you have to take that into account when developing for Android. So what is the biggest platform challenges to create and roll out these games across all those platforms? We have over 20 games available for 5 platforms. That's over 100 SKUs. And every time we release a new game for a new platform, we have discussions with platforms, as we have really good relations with them, and they would create new requirements every year. So you need to have those unique selling points for those platforms. Does this game support cloud saves, Game Center, iCloud, and all the new different things like Amazon Game Circle out there? And unless you have that, your game wouldn't either get featured, wouldn't get promoted, or wouldn't appear on all those monthly best picks or what's new and things like that. And in case of Apple, you have to rethink your game for touch first. If you're coming from desktop, you couldn't just port your game, which has endless arrows and tutorial pointing and things and how to do that. You have to throw that out and rethink the game for touch first. And unless you do that, your game might not be considered for featuring out there. So luckily, nowadays, you have all this great insight by those platforms. You could just go to developersfacebook.com and have over 100 pages of documentation that doesn't only apply to Facebook canvas gaming, that's desktop gaming, but to mobile as well. Price scaling, invites, requests, all those things you had to figure out it yourself 5 years ago. Nowadays, it's clearly written. The same goes for Apple. If you log into Member Center, you would find a lot of videos from WWDC explaining their vision about games. It didn't exist a few years ago, but now you could see that. The same applies to Google. You have to go to YouTube and find some of their playtime sessions where developers and a platform shares their vision and explains how to integrate things properly and have higher chance of being featured on the platform. And a lot of those things are really, really essential. Amazon has a page like that as well, and when they started, basically, they just had an SDK. Nowadays, they have case studies and best practices. The same applies for Microsoft. They don't have a dedicated gaming section yet, but maybe it's coming for builds. They just have some user experience bars explaining the size of the button and just general things out there. And if you look at the games, how they have evolved in the last 5 years, so the game on the left is a city building game that we have built 6 years ago for social networks, which had this UI where you had to hover over element to see its description. So it was mouse first. And then in the top right corner, you would find the games that we have ported to the very first Android phones. 480 by 320 resolution, touch. It wasn't kind of touch first, but it was partially rethought for that. And once you look at the bottom right corner, you would find that nowadays it's all about 3D and no UI. It should be so intuitive that people should just touch that and get that. And actually there are some Apple guidelines announced last year that if you could avoid pointing arrows at things and just visually show and blink and react to user actions, it's so much better. And that's one of the guidelines for being featured as well. But still, PC and social is not that. If you're a mobile first developer, once you go back to PC, you have to figure out how to adapt your game, which typically doesn't have hovers, which typically doesn't have hints. You have to do that again and go back to this PC era and implement full featured mouse support. You also need to have 4K, ultra-wide HD and all those things out there, because there are so many new PCs which have those extreme resolutions. And once you do graphics in the new age for mobile, for Retina, also think about PCs if you are planning to do that. And also all those UIs which have random resolutions, you could stretch those windows, you could go window it in full screen at the same time on PCs. What about this mobile user experience? If it requires a user to drag and drop a thing from bottom left corner to bottom right, and that takes 3 mouse swipes. Think about this mobile user experience as well. It has to be rethought. So now, if you have launched the game for all those platforms, think about the consistency. We call this a funnel. So this is our approach of evaluating how the game performs across all platforms. So if you have analytics systems plugged in, start comparing basic things like tutorial completion rates on the platform. Does the game perform as good on Windows as it performs on Google Play, so on Android? And you have to figure out if it's wrong, why is that? Is there a bug in certain resolution, a certain region, or somewhere else? What about purchase rates? Is this about the platform? It doesn't have a great payment solution. That's why you have to add more payment methods. So Microsoft is one of those platforms which allows you to add additional mobile payments SDKs and doesn't restrict that. So you could do that and increase your purchase rate on those platforms. And what about retention? Not every platform has push notifications and messages available by default. Could you optimize the flow for a user so he would get more of those messages and at more appropriate time? You have to think about every platform from scratch and figure out if all of these features are available, if you could actually retain the users and let them in the game as good as on other platforms. So for us, it's both a marathon and the sprint. A marathon means that a lot of our games exist for 4 years, maybe 3 years, and they've been updated every month. So you have to delight your users with new seasonal content, with new major game updates, with maybe 2.0, 3.0 version of the game. And the secret sauce behind that is just saying boom, boom, boom. Every month you have to update 10 titles on all those platforms and we run those events. And it's really hard to make sure that you would get 10 teams in different places of the world figuring out how to run, let's say, a Thanksgiving event, which might not be very typical for a European company or even for Eastern European company. And it requires a lot of alignment of things here and there. Running marketing campaigns, running retargeting campaigns. And this is a part of the secret sauce that nowadays, unless you run those retargeting campaigns and say to users, hey, there is an update available with the turkey and the pilgrims, come back to our game and get some extra coins for completion of those quests. Unless you do that, it's not enough just to release an update. Nobody will notice that. You have to market that very actively. So you could go to Facebook Showcase and see some case studies like we retain hundreds of thousands of users through those retargeting campaigns by letting our players know the new content is available out there. So one of the key questions of this talk was what's next? Actually, where is the future? Actually, I always say that the future is now. We live in this super cross-platform world. You could develop the game easily for all platforms. You're not restricted by games as it was in a console world where you had gatekeepers and you had to certify games for months and months. And back when I started, I can't even remember that, maybe 15 years ago, you had to go back to those platforms, get those SDKs, then find the publisher and do things like that. So nowadays, the platforms are open, you could do whatever you want. And the platforms are actually great. Nowadays you could deliver full 3D mobile gaming. The mobile platforms are so powerful that you could deliver console-like experience on mobile platforms on the go. And you have Unity, so you could develop this in a very easy and cross-platform way. And the last thing is just keep delivering the great content across all those platforms, delight your users, and good things will happen. So, and I guess that's the message that I was going to explain about cross-platform and mobile games. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Anatoly. We still have some time for questions. Okay. Anybody from the audience? Okay.
Hi, good morning. Can you give us some examples of cross-platform when you had like a game on the desktop and you launch after the mobile app? How did you migrate your players to the mobile?
Yeah, well, the classical case is having a great game on social networks, if it's developed in Flash, you can update it at any time in social networks, and we had games like Paradise Island and My Country developed 5 years ago, and then once you have this huge audience, you would just launch a message to all those players, hey, this game is available for mobile. So if you have a really high daily active user count, let's say 1 million players, about half of them will be willing, maybe 30%, to download this game on mobile, and that gives you an instant boost in the charts, and this leads you to the tops for at least a few days. And then it's a great start, and from that you could move on to mobile. So it doesn't work the same way on desktop. Typically the case of player transition from mobile to desktop is a more complex game. We have a game called Dragon Eternity, which is an MMO game that we keep developing for over 3 years now with 10 million players. It's very complex to play on iPhone, so if a player finds a game on iPhone, he will experience that and then transition to desktop and PC because it's so much easier to play that. But when he's on the go and when he needs to chat with clan members or perhaps to participate in some event, he will still play on mobile. And these are some of the cases when you need to take into account transition one way or another one. Hope that answers the question.
More questions? Don't be shy. All right.
Can you tell us what's the difference in player behavior when they're playing, when same player is playing desktop or mobile version?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. The biggest difference is obviously the session length time. On PC, once you're sitting by PC, you're not being distracted by so many things, as this is a multi-platform, multitasking environment. You could play on Facebook and maybe there is a Skype thing out there, but you could still come back to the game. So the session time is much, much longer. Players could dedicate hours and hours to playing your game. While on mobile, you're being constantly distracted by those incoming messages, and it's a single tasking environment. So if you play the game, a message comes in, the session abruptly ends. And for players, it's much harder to come back because typically they would just keep chatting with whoever they chat with, and that's the end of the session for them. So for us, we see that's the biggest thing out there. So on PCs, this much longer session time typically leads to paywalls much more often, and we actually see that payment behavior on desktop sometimes is better than on mobile, because once you have this really long session, you want to pay more through that.
Do you have more questions?
So thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, Anatoly. Let's give him a round of applause.